Hi there. My name is Alex Herman, and I'm going to be speaking about some socially responsible computing and the exercise that was put in place to kind of test this. So, uh, the first question is to kind of talk about what is socially responsible computing. And I think socially responsible computing is being a programmer that engages kind of with a lot of the ideas of this class. Like, is my work going to help people? Am I using unbiased data? Did I even see if my data is unbiased? Am I developing a technology that could hurt people in a way I don't expect? Do I care if my technology hurts people, or do I just care about the money that I make? Like, I think a lot of these questions are like pretty, like, seem like they should obviously be asked, but I think in practice they're really not. Um, and so I think in that way, like the idea of socially responsible computing is very similar to race critical code studies, because race critical code studies is like, how is the code that we're producing like racially coded, and like, how is it being used to like serve the surveillance state? And maybe the code that I write doesn't necessarily serve the surveillance state, but maybe it makes it easier to track, farm workers, and that information gets used by ICE in a way that I didn't expect. So I have to be very like conscious when I'm working on something like that. And with respect to abolitionist tool making, um, I think the socially conscious computing can go both ways, where you can be avoiding harm, but you can also be creating good. Um, in like a way that creating like an educational tool um, could be very helpful, or like the app that was developed that brought people's spare change to free Black people from bail. Like, I think that's awesome, and that's definitely some socially responsible computing right there. Um, so this approach specifically, where they're having kids code, and they're asked to think about like housing decisions and priority. Um, I think it's a pretty cool thing. I think it's really good to make computer science students think about the issues that their code is going to address. Because I feel like a lot of times computer science feels like a very sterile, very neutral topic, where you're like, okay, we're going to optimize how we get the strings parsed out of this data set, or we're going to um, get this algorithm to run 20% faster. And it's like, what if that algorithm that is running 20% faster is doing facial recognition for racial profiling? Like, those are the kinds of things that we'd like to avoid. That I don't think this exercise actually addresses very well, because I think it addresses that there are impacts of your decisions, but I don't think it really talks about like what did I say here? I said no discussions of bias data or racism inherent to systems. So I feel like this exercise could have had the potential to like grasp one of the key ideas from this course, that like bias is inherent in like everything, and you have to be really aware of how the work that you're doing is interacting with inherent bias in the systems. Like, I don't know, for housing, they use it seems like it's a little bit like more neutral, because they talk about like age, and like these are definitely like issues, but I wouldn't say like age is necessarily like an oppressive system that we're really dealing with. Um, and I didn't think that this exercise, obviously it's introduced early in the course. I don't know if they introduced things later in the course that were similar, but it didn't feel like there was much algorithmic freedom. Like if you look at the formatting, he's like, do it like if, this, and then award points, and then if age, award these points. It's like, you could come up with such a more complex algorithm that really like actually like did some interesting thinking about how to award these points, rather than just being like, exactly, put in my own opinions into the algorithm and that's what we get out. Like, I think something a lot of computer science students don't necessarily realize is that when you're when you're creating an algorithm, a lot of times, or something I feel like this didn't reflect, is that when you create an algorithm, it doesn't necessarily reflect what you think. Sometimes you're coming up with something that feels optimized, and it just feels that way, and you're like, oh good, it's giving me a good answer, like this makes sense. Not necessarily that you can track through the whole process of that algorithm, and I think that's a problem. um, later on, but you need to learn how to address that, and this doesn't address that. Let's see. Some questions I had from this is, yeah, the first one that I just kind of mentioned, like, how do you get people to interrogate the idea of like, what does it mean to have an algorithm that you don't understand or that is challenging to trace through? Like, I feel like a lot of these algorithms are, they're going to start simple, like if, like little, like, waterfall trees, like, oh, like if this, then go that, and then kind of like little thing like that, little binary tree. But like, obviously, as we move towards AI driven approaches, like that is not gonna hold up, and we're gonna be left with like algorithms that we just cannot understand and we can't even trace through. And then um, that kind of brings me to some recommendations. Um, I think when when we talk about this kind of stuff, when we talk about like um, socially responsible computing, we need to focus on transparency as our fundamental. Like, how do we build more transparency into these things? Like when that recommended article um, from Newth where he talked, it was the disabled people losing their access to care. I wrote down this quote where the healthcare workers, they were saying, "It is beyond my authority and expertise to question the validity of this result." We would like to avoid that. We don't want that, because then no one knows what's going on. And then we leads us to the second issue where we need there's no technological due process, because if someone's rights are taken away and no one can point to the problem and there's no way to challenge it, then that's just like a demon has come and robbed them, and no one can do anything. It's like, oh, who are you going to shoot? And so um, we need to have transparency, and we need to have due process. So we need a way to contest, AI driven analysis. And we don't need to always create these systems. Like, I mean, maybe the personnel based system that was currently in place was like more expensive, but maybe better training for those employees could help reduce bias, and then that fixes the issue of bias that you're trying to solve with this ruthless program. Like, maybe we don't always need algorithmic solutions to our problems. And I think this is addressed in the thing where he talks about like how students can choose not to, like they can choose, like they kind of brings in the discussion of choosing not to design. And this was definitely like, referenced more in the text in the book about like, Amazon workers not designing like drone algorithms and stuff like that. But I think that's something that could have been brought into this discussion as well. That's all I got. Thank you.